What's up, everybody? Today I wanted to do a little bit of a check-in at the start of RCQ season because you know what? Some of you guys out there might be thinking, it's modern. I've been too busy playing standard, or maybe you haven't even been playing RCQ seasons at all because modern's your format. And you're like me, a real freak who wants to play Modern Burn at competitive REL tournaments despite it not being a competitively viable deck. And you're brave. I think you're a brave soul for wanting to do that. I might do it as well. And so for those brave souls, those brave, foolish souls who think that this is a good idea, I wanted to provide some resources for people trying to actually take that a little bit more seriously. Maybe this is the only deck you have in Modern, or maybe it's just something that is like a big favorite of yours. Either way, let's go over what your options are in 2026 for the upcoming RCQ season if you want to actually take and register some version of Burn at an event. We're going to go over the different builds that are available right now, and then we're going to go over some of the top meta decks you can expect to face in these RCQs. And just some stuff to look out for, some notable cards, some things to play around that might just help you up your win percentage a little bit. So I'm going to go over a couple of variants. And this is not all inclusive. There's a bunch of different ways you can build Burn right now, and they're all kind of different levels of competing viability. And so if you have a personal build that I don't go over in this one, it's probably fine. I'm sure it's running like 80% the same cards. The main difference right now is whether you're running Chandra's Incinerator or you're not, and you're doing more of a stock build. I will be going over both kinds. To start us off, I have got Boros Burn. This is a very basic, normal list. This is actually the list that I'm on right now. This is what I would be taking to a tournament potentially. And if you look a little close here, you're going to notice some weird stuff. I'll get into that in a second. But just if you want to still register regular vanilla Boros Burn, I actually think that this is still close to, if not the most viable build of the deck right now. We'll talk a little bit more when we get to the Incinerator builds. Some of those I think are good if you want to attack certain matchups or come at it at a different angle that's a little bit more aggressive and have a little more unfair. But if you just love playing regular Burn, this is Burn. It's got all the cards you want. It's got Bolts, it's got Swift Spear, and it's got Goblin Guide. I am trying at the moment in this build, and this is all, I adjust my build all the time, but you're going to notice a couple of things. 19 lands instead of 20. I've always been greedy. I always prefer the extra flex slot in the main board, and I take that at the expense of the 19th land. I am playing 2 Barbarian Rings. Some people play more. I think that's a good number. I could see going up to 3, but I like my mana base not being extremely painful, so I still have a couple of Inspiring Vantages in. That is also because I have very nice Hatsune Miku Secret Lair Inspiring Vantages, and I just want to play with them. It's totally fine, though. Elegant Parlor, I think Surveil lands are great. Even if you draw them sometimes, the value of being able to basically time walk, just making sure that the turn that you're going to have is good. Binning a land or a creature that is terrible when you're fishing for lethal burn has won me a lot of games. And then a fetch suite to go along with your Searing Blazes and your dual land mana base. Why Boros? Why not some of these other color combinations? A lot of people are going mono red, and I will be covering mono red in a second as well. What are the upsides to Boros? So there's a couple of obvious ones. Boros Charm, still premium on-rate burn. 4 damage is the most that we do in the deck. And even though it is 2 mana, instant speed 4 direct dome damage, pretty good, pretty powerful. I think some people don't value this card as much as they should because it is 2 mana, but instant speed is so important in Modern right now. The ability to time your burn when it is guaranteed or very, very likely to go off is, I think, a very key skill set when you're piloting this deck. There is a temptation, I think, to just kind of dump your hand out as you go, maybe play your sorcery speed spells and just tap out, but if you tap out in Modern right now, that's not always the best play. So the way I build my Modern Burn decks right now, I like having as much instant speed as is viable. So I am playing Boros Charm, Searing Blaze, and Skullcrack. Having enough of these 2 mana instant speed burn spells gives you the opportunity to just pass the turn with 2 mana up, and if you need to Skullcrack to prevent life gain, you can do that. Or if not, you just fire off a Boros Charm in their end step or whatever is the best timing. And then obviously you need a fetch for Searing Blaze to work. I am running 7 to help facilitate that in the deck right now. And I think that usually lets it line up. And there's a lot of good Searing Blaze targets in the meta. That's why we're on 4 of them. Energy is everywhere. Blink is everywhere. Prowess is pretty popular. And even some of the decks that aren't going to be as like creature heavy are still going to have enough targets that Searing Blaze is at least not completely dead. And then you can always board it out when it's not as good. Eidolon is a controversial card. With Storm as popular in the meta right now, I think that it is probably wrong to leave home without some number in your 75. Some people have switched to putting them into the sideboard. I don't like Eidolon in the sideboard personally. I think it's an effect that is typically better in the main deck because I don't want to waste my very precious sideboard slots for something that's only coming in a couple of matchups. And despite it getting removed pretty frequently, it is still pretty good in a lot of spots. If you have a quick start and then you follow it up with an Eidolon, your opponent is under a lot of pressure, especially if they don't have a clean answer to it. The problem is, unfortunately, in the meta, there are a lot of clean answers to Eidolon that maybe sometimes don't even deal any damage to the opponent. Like if they have Solitude Scam with Ephemerate, you just get cooked. But outside of that, there's a lot of good matchups. It's very good into stuff like obviously Storm, Prowess, Belcher, even like Dimir midrange and decks like that can get rid of it pretty easily. If you find the right time to stick it, can be pretty devastating. So I have found that it is better than it seems, but it is kind of a high skill testing card. And it's also easy to cut if you don't need it. And if you hate it, if you just keep playing it, it doesn't work for you at all, you can totally cut it. You can take it out, throw a couple of copies in the sideboard, or play some other kind of Storm hate like Damping Sphere or like Magebane Lizard or something. We have a pretty good Storm matchup even without it, TBH. Goblin Guide. I am not playing the full suite of creatures. That is because I need room for all of my various flex slots, and I'll be completely honest, Goblin Guide has gotten a lot worse over the years. It does not trade very well into a lot of the top like meta decks. They tend to play a lot of creature blockers that invalidate it. It is sometimes only attacking for 2 damage and then either dying or getting blocked for the rest of the game. It is still good, and there are still plenty of matchups where having a bunch of early creature aggression really does increase your clock and get you over the finish line. So that's why it's still in the deck. But I've been pretty happy with 3 copies. I also very frequently side this card out in a lot of different matchups. Swift Spear I still play the full suite of because she has the maximum damage potential. And because we have so many 1-mana bolts now, there are plenty of turns when she's attacking for 3 or 4 damage. That does happen more often than you'd think. Also, at 2-3, she can sometimes trade in combat a little bit better. That does end up mattering sometimes. Path to Exile is the other, and Wear Tear. Let's talk about the white sideboard cards. I kind of got off track. These are the other reasons to be in Boros. So you are going to, Path is just premium removal. It's 1 mana, get rid of any problematic creature right now in the meta. I am most often pointing this at Psychic Frog or Quantum Riddler, sometimes Phlage. If things are getting that bad, you usually don't want to be in that spot. I'm not bringing this in versus Boros Energy. The going 1-for-1 with a 1 or 2 mana spell is just bad. But big chunky creatures, problematic Eldrazi threat, Sire of 7 Deaths. There's plenty of hits for this in the meta. And then Wear Tear is so good. Just the flexibility of being able to answer an Urza Saga on turn 1 and Stone Rain them, and then also killing a Shadow Spear or, whatever problematic artifact they have in Affinity. Claws of Gix, that's a bad one right now. That one is very, very flexible, and it's our only out to Leyline of the Guild Pact in Zoo, and that is just a card we can't beat. Deflecting Palm is another great white card. Really good for some of the decks that are swinging at us with giant creatures. There are a couple of notable ones. It also beats Belcher if they somehow don't have a counterspell for it. Still worth bringing in. I just have that kind of as a one-of right now. So those are our white sideboard cards and the sort of reason to be Boros. And honestly, just between Boros Charm and Wear Tear, that's enough for me. I like both of those cards quite a lot. What you'll also notice in my sideboard for this deck is that I am playing 4 copies of Leyline of Punishment, which is a terrible card. It is truly atrocious. And you might be wondering, hey Chris, why are you playing a dog shit terrible card like Leyline of Punishment? And that's because I have to. There is so much life gain in the format right now. In matchups like Energy and Solitude decks like Jeskai Blink or Goryo's, it's just hard to keep up. And so I have unfortunately resigned myself to having to play a very bad card that is sometimes going to steal matches for us, because that is one way that we can kind of get back into these games. And you know what? Since I put this in, I've beaten Jeskai Blink and Energy a lot of times in situations when I wouldn't, because honestly, with this bad boy out, Energy is kind of just a whatever matchup. If you can race them, which you're pretty good at doing anyway, and the only reason that we're not good at racing a mopey mid-range creature deck, which, you know, back in the day for burn, like Jund was... Energy is very similar to what Jund was used to be doing. And we ate that for breakfast. It was like our premium matchup that we loved. So if you can kind of turn off that life gain element, it shuts down a bunch of their synergies, A, and then B, you know, it just lets you race them in a really effective way. Obviously, they have access to cards like Celestial Purge, but, you know, they only have a couple of copies of those, and so if they find it, it sucks, but you can still, you know, push through it. I'm just testing it. It's been solid so far. I'm still trying to figure out what matchups it's worth it. Like, is it worth bringing in against Affinity because of Claws of Gix and Shadow Spear? Probably not. Still testing all of that. So that's my Boros burn build. I'm going to go over a couple of the other ones now real quick. So if you maybe don't have all of the white cards or can't afford it, there is also an option of playing mono red. The good mono red builds, the best ones, unfortunately, are going to be playing a bunch of fetches to support Barbarian Ring, Shard Volley, and Searing Blaze. So you can play a budget build of this that's mostly just mountains. It's going to be a little bit worse, obviously. This is kind of a faster deck that doesn't play any of the extra cards. It's got all of the regular cards you'd want. It's pretty much just the same deck. It's just no white cards, a little less painful on the life total, but not actually that different, because even without shocks, you got a lot of pain lands in here. There's not much to say. This is just kind of burned at its purest form, and I think there's an appeal for people that like that. I personally think that Boros is just kind of straight up better because of the access to the sideboard cards. So I'm not going to spend too much time on that. Let's pivot over to the Chandra's Incinerator builds. I'm going to start with the mono red one, because this is the one that you guys have probably seen the most if you're not familiar, because big content creators like Mingu have tested it a couple of times. So if you're not familiar with Chandra's Incinerator, it is a 6 mana spell. It is a 6/6 with trample that costs X less to cast, which is the total amount of non-combat damage dealt to your opponents this turn. This means our burn spells reduce the cost of it, and what we can do is we can either suspend a Rift Bolt on turn 1, and then, or cast a Seal of Fire on turn 1, and then follow it up with literally any 3 damage spell. So Skewer the Critics, Lava Spike, Bolt Wave, Lightning Bolt, Shard Volley, if you really, that'd be kind of nuts. That's what an all-in play. Any of those work, and if you do those together, you get a Chandra's Incinerator on turn 2. You get a 6/6 Trampler, and that's not all. It also says whenever a source you control deals non-combat damage to an opponent, this creature deals that much damage to target creature or planeswalker that player controls. This means every other burn spell you cast for the rest of the game is going to deal damage to creatures as well, which means it dominates creature decks like Energy if it sticks. Obviously a very powerful effect. The problem is that it's a little inconsistent. It doesn't always line up to where you're getting it on turn 2, and you can totally navigate situations where you're casting it on a later turn if you happen to top deck it, because it only takes 2 burn spells to get online, but that can be a little bit clunky. The other big benefit of this deck is that we are also running 4 copies of Arena of Glory, which if you've played Modern, you're more used to maybe phlage getting scammed out that way. Attacking the turn it comes down, but we're doing it to play a turn 2 Chandra's Incinerator, which is either 11 or 12 damage on turn 2. And that's a lot of damage, let me tell you what. Usually if I'm doing the arena combo, you've won that game. And that's that kind of explosive combo factor, the little bit of an unfair factor that I was talking about that can give Burn an edge in matchups where it otherwise would not be doing so well. That is what the appeal of these builds are. You are trading a little bit of consistency and redundancy, which is what Bird is kind of known for a much more explosive combo finish that can kind of push you over the edge. The problems, like I mentioned, it's a little bit inconsistent, and if you don't mulligan to the turn 2 combo, you just kind of have a regular burn deck that's a little bit clunkier, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, you're still playing Goblin Guide, Swift Spear, and a bunch of like bolts. You can still just be burn, and it's totally fine. But but unfortunately, it doesn't always line up the way you'd like it to. And then Chandra's Incinerator is still just a creature, and creatures get exiled to Solitude. So your mileage may vary. There are removal spells that hit this thing. Counter Magic still hits it. Black, like hard removal, hits it. But I think Solitude is kind of the main, or Solitude and Subtlety, I would say, are like the main free pitch interaction that kind of make the strategy worse. And there is quite a lot of Solitude in the meta right now, which is why I don't love the idea of registering it, because you go all in on Incinerator and then they just have a Solitude and you're just kind of, you eat shit and they're screwed after that. But there's real appeal, and I get the real appeal. So this is the mono red build. You may have seen Mengu play it. It's very quick and consistent. I can't blame anyone for liking it. I think it's pretty solid myself. But if I was to take one to tournaments, I would take a build looking closer to this. So this is a Rakdos Incinerator build. And the big benefit of splashing black is that we get access to a card from Bloomburrow called Iridescent Vine Lasher. This says when a land you control enters, this creature deals 1 damage to target opponent. So with Iridescent Vine Lasher, we have another way to enable turn 2 Incinerator, because if you have Vine Lasher on turn 1, a fetch on turn 2, and a Bolt Wave or any 1 damage burn spell, you get your Incinerator because Vine Lasher has dealt 2 damage. That's 5. That's our magic number. So we have a third enabler, which means we are getting way more consistency with actually putting Chandra's Incinerator into play on turn 2. Notably, you cannot give it Arena of Glory does not work with Vine Lasher because you have to have that fetch, and you can't play Arena of Glory untapped on turn 1. So just a bit of sequencing trouble. You can do this on turn 3 potentially if you want to wait, but it doesn't work turn 2, and you're trying to usually go for the turn 2 nuts. This build doesn't play any creatures but Vine Lasher. I could see an argument for cutting the Searing Blazes and playing Swift Spear, maybe throwing the Searing Blazes into the sideboard, but this build is a little less all in on creatures, focusing on the Incinerator combo and then just consistent burn across the board. And it also gives you access to black sideboard cards like Fatal Push, Rakdos Charm, which is really good in modal right now, Reign of Gore. There's a couple others you could probably play. Just access to a different color and some different options. This, in my testing, I've liked this build the best because I like what Iridescent Vine Lasher does. I think it makes it a little bit more consistent. And I've had a reasonable amount of success, and it's a reasonable amount of fun trying to play decks like this. You also have to play a really high fetch count to enable Vine Lasher, so this is a bit of a painful mana base, but that also means Arena of Glory is pretty much always online, and that's valuable as well. Okay. There are maybe a couple other builds you could go over. There's some people that like a Boros Incinerator build, so that just plays Boros Charm alongside the rest of these cards. It's very similar to this deck. No Vine Lasher, obviously, and that's totally fine. It's kind of a hybrid of main and Incinerator. I like it all right. But those are kind of your options if you're looking to build a deck. The ones that I think you're going to see the most often these days are either the mono red Incinerator build or the regular Boros build, and then like a couple of people are playing Rakdos. And those are kind of your options. Obviously, like I said, I kind of went over the different pros and cons of each. If you want something more consistent, you want to pick a build without Incinerator. If you want something with that potential of that high roll explosivity, you should play Incinerator. So let's take a quick break, and then we will go through the current meta. Let's go through some of the most common decks you're going to face in your RCQs, but from the perspective of a burn player. And it's very important when evaluating matchups to not necessarily think about the decks in the way that you might normally, especially if you've come to like play a bunch of other decks, because burn operates on a slightly different axis. We care way more about life gain. We care way more about speed. Sometimes it's okay to let our opponent's deck do the thing that they're supposed to do, but if we're not dead, then we don't care, because our goal is to get them dead first, right? So we're going to kind of approach things with a little bit of a different angle. So I'm just going to start with this is basically an order of goldfishes, like top to bottom. We're just going to start with a boogeyman. This is Boros Energy. This is one of the main reasons that burn is not viable in tournaments anymore, because this deck is such a presence. It is something that is pretty difficult for us to beat, even if we're teched for it. Just because at its core, it is a deck built around life gain synergy and a very fast, aggressive clock. And that is difficult for us to deal with. There are a bunch of creatures that I would describe as must kill, and they all cost 1 or 2 mana. And then, unfortunately, Phlage, Titan of Fire's Fury is a 1-card win condition that can essentially stop us in our tracks completely and then win the game if it is deployed on turn 4 or 5 by itself, with pretty much nothing else for them to do. This makes it a pretty potent combination of threats, and it is a little difficult for us to deal with. Guide of Souls, I would say, is probably the card that we want to kill the most if we have a choice, right? Because Guide of Souls, it's a Soul Warden effect. Whenever another creature enters, they get a life and an energy, and the energy can be utilized later on for cards like Galvanic Discharge or for just its ability in attacking big. You don't want to let them get a bunch of energy and then make a giant flying lifelink Ocelot Pride. That doesn't go well for us. But typically you're going to want to kill Guide of Souls. Ocelot Pride has lifelink, annoying for sure. Not always worth casting a bolt on. I would say that if it attacks once or twice, it's not the end of the world unless there's other synergies on board. Guide of Souls is typically going to be the one gaining way more life than just Pride attacking with lifelink. Ragavan, if you've played Modern since this card comes out, you know it's a bit of a gamble to leave it around. Sometimes you kind of have to because you don't have a choice, but it is pretty good to kill because with a Ragavan out, your opponent is also playing Burn. The days of it hitting Lightning Helix and being a beating for us are over because we don't play Lightning Helix anymore. But you don't want Ragavan hitting a bunch of your bolts. It's going to make them the burn deck in addition to the energy deck, and that can be quite potent because they are already playing the same colors you are and can cast all of your spells, and the treasure just helps them accelerate. Ajani can get very scary very quickly, but he's a little bit less of a problem unless they have Goblin Bombardment out, but he's a little bit easier to race. And then, like we talked about, Phlage is the real big problem. If this card didn't exist, I genuinely think Burn would be way better positioned in the meta. Phlage is kind of the problem that we constantly have to have in the back of our mind when we're playing in matchups that it exists in, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in Jeskai Blink and Domain Zoo. But I cannot stress this enough. You have to have a plan for Phlage. You have to. If you don't, you will just lose. We are not fast enough, unfortunately, to win through Phlage getting escaped. We can sometimes beat Phlage getting cast the first time. It's just a Lightning Helix. It sucks. We don't like the swing, especially if they're able to kill one of our creatures. But that escape, that just ends the game on the spot. They're attacking for like 9 damage and gaining 3 life every turn. And with Arena of Glory, just, pack it up. There's very few decks that can beat Arena of Glory Phlage in the first place. It's just one of the premier combos in Modern right now. So, how do we want to approach this matchup as Burn? If you're playing Incinerator, you just want to get turn 2 Incinerator out as fast as possible, and you're just going to steamroll them because by the time he's out, he's a gigantic body that has trample, and every additional burn spell you beat is just free removal. It's the best thing you can do. Otherwise, Searing Blaze is your friend. That is the best card in the deck by far. Turn 2 answer to literally everything that they play except for Phlage, and you can just kind of pick your most relevant target. The best way to beat energy, even with like stock burn, is win the die roll, and obviously you don't have a ton of control over this, but win the die roll, have an aggressive start, Searing Blaze, whatever they do on turn 2, and then keep them just barely destabilized enough to pressure a ton of damage and win the game before they get any of their engines set up. If you have Skullcrack in hand and you think you can afford passing into their Phlage turns, so like 3 and 4, depending on what their mana is looking like, if you can Skullcrack that first Phlage, that is usually a game-winning play because they won't have quite enough time to escape it unless they have like a nut draw with it. But usually it is rare for this deck to be able to go turn 3, turn 4. They can do it. It's definitely possible, but it doesn't always happen. I still think this is not a very good matchup. You can play tech cards like Sweepers, Pyroclasm, Brotherhood's End, Flame Break, and especially in more stock builds of Burn, that is a totally viable way to try to come back, but your mileage may vary, especially the 3 mana ones. Sometimes we can't afford to do that, or it's hard for us to get to that spot. And the deck is very resilient and good at rebuilding. Just be careful, know where the life gain happens, and this is a scary deck, and that's why I'm playing bad cards like Leyline of Punishment, because that is a clean way to stop all the life gain here. The other best deck in the format right now is similar but a little different. This is Jeskai Blink. This is the build with Casey Jones. I'm going to see if I can find a little bit more of a typical one. I guess they're all playing Casey Jones. So this deck is playing a little bit of the energy suite synergies too, but it's really just good Modern Horizons 3 cards and good modern cards in general. This deck is trying to accumulate value through a very efficient suite of interaction and creature threats that have a lot of blink synergies. So they're playing 2 copies of Ephemerate to blink them with good ETBs. They're also utilizing Felia, Exuberant Shepherd. When it attacks, it gets to blink something. So this lets them scam in Quantum Riddler, which starts out as a warped 4/6 and then just becomes a 4/6. They can also the Casey Jones is kind of the new thing. It just lets them get around their silly little discard trigger. They're also playing a bunch of copies of Consigned to Memory to sort of consign the triggers on a bunch of these effects. So you can consign the warp trigger on Quantum Riddler and then it sticks around. You can consign the escape trigger off of Phlage and it sticks around. So just a lot of tricks like that can be really, really potent. This deck is actually a little bit of a better matchup for Burn than Energy, just because their answers don't always line up with us quite as well. The scariest thing that they can do is Phlage, still, much like Energy. And this deck is very good at doing that, especially because they have the Consigned to Memory trick with Phlage. And then there, if it gets... That is a 4-mana play. So obviously, by the time we're getting to that point of the game, hopefully you've done a good job at knocking them down, getting the damage out there. But you really just want to try to prevent this deck from gaining life. And there's a couple ways they're going to do that. Mainly, it's going to be Solitude. They're going to be put in a position where they have to Solitude one of their own creatures to stay alive, and get a little burst of life gain, so just be on the lookout for that. Also, they can just scam Solitude in, and then they're attacking with a 3/2 lifelinker, and that's a little bit hard to come back from, even with Burn. So that's a card that you want to kind of keep on your radar, and if you have a Searing Blaze for it, obviously you want to use it. But it's a tricky little matchup, but they can have some clunky draws that can prevent them from really accelerating, and... it just kind of depends. Your mileage may vary. This deck is one where I would say Incinerator is, as much as you wish it's good, the 4 copies of Solitude they run are going to eat your lunch, and they're going to mulligan for it because a bunch of people still have the sort of incorrect perception that Burn is a creature deck. I don't know what that is, but a lot of people overvalue creature removal into Burn when we really don't have a ton, and spells tend to be more important. But I promise you they're going to keep their Solitudes. If they're really smart and they're really paying attention to the meta, they might even know about Incinerator, and that's the reason too. So it's tricky. There's a lot of life gain, but there's a lot less life gain than it is in Energy. And if you can be smart with your Skullcracks and play around Phlage and play around Solitude, you can win this matchup. So ever since Mox Opal got unbanned in Modern, Affinity made a huge comeback, and they also printed fucking Kappa Cannoneer for some reason. And that's a card we have to deal with in Modern now. This deck is trying to put a bunch of artifacts into play very early, very cheap artifacts that cost 0 or 1. And they are trying to cheat out big cards like Kappa Cannoneer with Affinity, or with Improvise, rather. I guess are they actually playing any... I guess they're playing Metallic Rebuke. No, that's Improvise too. I'm trying to see if there are any cards in the deck that actually have the word Affinity on it, because I don't really think they do. Anyway, it's just a very aggressive artifact synergy deck. The scariest card in this deck for us is Shadow Spear, which is very easily tutorable with Urza Saga. If they play it on turn 1, expect Shadow Spear on turn 3. And then they're probably also going to have enough mana to equip it to a gigantic Kappa Cannoneer and swing for, at least 6 lifelink damage, probably more like 10 lifelink damage, and then you're just going to die on the spot. So you need to navigate into a situation to where either you have killed them before that happens, or you can Skullcrack that swing and hopefully not die, just because it's a bunch of damage, and then maybe win on your upkeep. Or your next turn. Artifact Hate is premium. Some people play Meltdown. Some people play Smash to Smithereens. Wear Tear, like I talked about before, that lets you hit cards like Weapons Manufacturing if that's looking scary. Lets you hit cards like Claws of Gix, which they do have to have the mana, and it's only 1 life, so it's not quite as... It's annoying, but it's not the end of the world, if you know what I mean. And making them get rid of material is probably worth it. But Shadow Spear is really just the one that is the most problematic for us. it really can end the game very quickly if this gets attached to a Kappa Cannoneer or to a Urza Saga Construct token. This matchup has gotten a lot harder. It used to be pretty good, but it's kind of like a classically even matchup for Burn. But just the speed at which they can present these gigantic threats in Kappa Cannoneer has gotten a lot scarier for the deck. Incinerator is pretty good in this matchup just because of how fast you can go. Next up is Ruby Storm. Mono red combo. That's so funny. This is the current Storm variant with Ral Monsoon Mage and Ruby Medallion as cost reducers, and the deck's goal is to get one of those cost reducers out and then start casting rituals and impulse spells to dig through their deck, churn together a bunch of casts, and then either wish or just cast Grape Shot or empty the Warrens from their sideboard or their main deck. This is a very fast combo deck. However, we are pretty good at racing them. If we are able to remove Ral with a Searing Blaze or a Bolt the turn he comes down, that usually buys us enough time to push over the edge. If you are running cards like Eidolon, this deck literally can't beat Eidolon, and sometimes they have trouble removing it, especially turn one or in game one. Post board, they have a little bit more interaction, like they might play some Prismatic Endings or something, or Galvanic Discharge or Bolt or whatever. But this is traditionally a great matchup. It's actually one of our only good matchups left in the format. We are just much faster than them. And like I said, we have a good way to interact in a couple of different directions. You could also bring in Graveyard Hate, and that helps stuff their Past in Flames lines. So you can kind of just pick and choose the spot where, like, you know, knock one of their legs out from under them. It doesn't have to be one specific thing, but you just make them stumble a little bit, and then at the same time you're applying constant pressure and they are not really interacting with your game plan, so you can just kind of clock them. It is a pretty good matchup. They do run Phlage in the sideboard sometimes, so watch out for that. Tron. I'm just going to group all of the Tron strategies together here, but this can include traditional Eldrazi Tron. This includes like red, green, ramp, just kind of all of the decks that are playing, you know, Devourer of Destiny and Ugin's Lab, and whether they're playing the actual Tron lands or just the Eldrazi temples or both, like in these common decks. I'm just kind of colorless ramp strategies into big scary threats. This, if you have been playing Burn for a long time, you might be surprised to say this, because Tron used to be one of our best matchups. We used to just farm them because they didn't do anything for 3 turns, and then by the time that they were putting their big threats down, that was enough for us to close the game out. That can still be the case. However, Wizards of the Coast has power crept the hell out of colorless spells, and some of the threats that they're resolving now are very, very bad for us. It's not Wormcoil or Big Karn anymore. It's Sire of 7 Deaths, a 7-mana First Strike, Vigilance, Menace, Trample, Reach, Lifelink, Ward, pay 7, and even worse, Ugin, Eye of the Storms. This horrible abomination of a Planeswalker that I am still mad that got printed. So this gains life, exiles your permanents, and adds mana for them to, you know, go crazy. But typically they're going to be gaining life and drawing cards. This card is pretty much impossible to beat if it resolves. If you have the Skullcrack, you can maybe squeak by, and if you don't, get fucked. But this can come out turn 3, and the deck is very, very good at getting this much mana early, even if they don't have all of the other fast mana just because of Kozilek's command. They can ramp up to this pretty quickly, and it's about the scariest thing that we can do. This deck is still a Chalice deck, so, you know, make sure to play around Chalice if you can, but Burn is actually pretty resilient at playing around Chalice, so that's nice. You can still totally race them. Just be smart about what you think their payoffs are, and, you know, hold Skullcrack if you have it, and otherwise just go as fast as possible. And we have some, you know, options in the sideboard. Obviously, we're not running Consigned to Memory, we're not blue, but we have Artifact Hate if we need that. Amulet Titan. This is also classically a very bad matchup for Burn, traditionally one of our worst, because this deck is just faster than us and there's almost nothing we can do about it. So If you, by some miracle, are able to win game one because they stumbled, congratulations. I will say, if you're playing Incinerator, this is one of the few matchups that actually swings a little bit in our favor if you're on the Incinerator plan, just because if you're able to establish that turn 2 threat, maybe hit a Arboreal Grazer on the way down, hit an Aftermath Analyst or whatever, you actually are threatening to race them in a really meaningful way, which is pretty cool. You have some options in the sideboard. Once you're moving to that part, you can bring in some Artifact Hate for Amulet. You can play some Graveyard Hate because the deck is so focused on doing graveyard combos now. And then obviously Wear Tear, like I mentioned earlier, both kills. It kills Urza Saga, Spelunking, and Amulet. So you've got some options. It's not completely dead, but this is traditionally a very bad matchup. It's just a very scary broken deck, though it's a little bit less popular than it has been. Goryo's Vengeance is a graveyard combo deck mid-range deck. So it is primarily just an Esper mid-range blink deck that also happens to have an extremely scary reanimate combo because Goryo's Vengeance is trying to scam an Atraxa or Grizzlebrand. So they have a bunch of discard outlets, primarily Psychic Frog, who is not only just a discard outlet, but a premier threat that wins the game by himself. Deeply Broken card from Modern Horizons 3. They are also playing Solitude, which can pitch Atraxa pretty easily, or any of the other white cards. They have a ton of white removal. And then, Force of Negation, Thoughtseize. So their goal is both to just play a mid-range game plan, and that at some point, if they're able to get it together, they will also slam a gigantic lifelink creature in your face that is potentially drawing them a ton of cards too. Your goal in this game is to try to navigate their interaction and then kill them before they're able to do the thing. Skullcrack goes a long way. Sometimes just skullcracking the lethal swing is enough to push you over the line. Obviously, they are playing Solitude. They are playing Ephemerate, so keep an eye out for that as well. This is a tricky matchup, but it is a 3-color mana-based deck. And we can get some value off of them trying to, or having to fetch shock occasionally. That's the case for Jeskai as well. That actually helps us a lot. And it's a little bit less of a bad matchup than it seems, is what I would say. You just have to be really careful about how you're deploying your threats, and what your sequencing is when it comes to your spells. But you can race this deck, I promise. And you've got some good sideboard options afterwards as well, if you're playing stuff like Graveyard Hate, Path to Exile, etc., etc. Oh man, Neobrand is crazy. So this is a ridiculous combo deck that's goal is to assemble some incredibly powerful creatures by casting Neoform on a scammed out Allosaurus Rider, and getting a giant creature. This deck does have a fail rate, but it is increasingly good at doing its combo turn somewhere in between the turns 2 or 4. You can easily race this deck if they brick. But if they have the combo, you're probably dead, especially if they're playing Nourishing Shoal to gain a bunch of life. If you are able to Skullcrack the Nourishing Shoal, they probably will lose on the spot. There are some tricky interaction points with this. But typically, it's just kind of a do you have it or do you not? And there's not a ton of sideboard plan stuff that you can do for this matchup either, just because of the way it works. You can bring in Path and then try to clip their Jalta or their Urini or their whatever their payoff is, because you can't actually interact with the Allosaurus Rider if they have Neoform, because it's a sacrifice cost, so they just sack it and you're not going to be able to path it anyway. But you just have to kind of try to race and go nuts. Roiling Vortex is pretty good in this matchup because they have a bunch of free spells like Summoner's Pact, Pact of Negation. Yeah. I don't know if I did a very good job of explaining this one, but it's kind of a crapshoot. It's kind of just luck-based. Domain Zoo is another very tricky matchup. This is such a polarizing one for Burn. If they do not have Leyline of the Guild Pact in play, it's actually a pretty even, I would say, matchup that is even in our favor, because it's a big 5-color deck that is, has a very painful mana base. It does have Phlage. That can be really tricky. You have to watch out for that. But it is a deck that we are actually able to race pretty effectively and get over the finish line before they're able to kill us, kind of depending on our draws. If they have Leyline of the Guild Pact, none of their fetches or shocks actually need to come in, because all their lands tap for the mana that they need. Their mana base is suddenly way less painful. And then at any point, if they resolve Scion of Draco, the game ends on the spot, and there's literally nothing you can do about it because they suddenly have a gigantic lifelink flying 4/4 hexproof creature that you can't kill. And there's pretty much no way to beat that, and you just concede. And that sucks, obviously. It's one of the reasons why Burn is not very good right now. It's just another matchup that really, really sucks because they usually have it. So bring in your wear tears if you're running them, and then you can try to clip the ley line. But otherwise, there's not much you can do if they have the combo. It's really uninteresting and really boring. Prowess, the other popular aggro deck in the format right now that's actually getting play because it's a lot better. We have a pretty fantastic matchup into this deck because we have a ton of bolts and a ton of removal. And while this deck is very scary and very explosive, Searing Blaze is a great card, and we can utilize that to our advantage. Typically, if we take the role of the control deck and just kind of keep the board clear while advancing our own threats or just throwing some bolts at their face, we will win the race. You have to be very careful because they can still come back in a single turn with cards like Violent Urge, Slickshot Show Off, Corey Steelcutter is a little slow but can get pretty scary, so it becomes about threat analysis and just kind of knowing how the deck operates, paying attention to stuff like how many lava darts are in the graveyard. You want to main phase your removal on your turn, not on their turn, because if they have mutagenic growth to protect the creature, you would rather them use it to protect the creature than to hit you in the face with lots of damage on their turn. So just keep that in mind as well. But this is pretty favored for us. Eidolon's great in this matchup because they usually have to cast a bunch of spells. You can just kind of lock them out. But yeah, we do a pretty good job in this matchup of racing them. And then the last one I'm going to talk about is Living End, which is a graveyard combo deck that is trying to use cascade spells like Shardless Agent and the other one, which this deck isn't running. Really? That's crazy. Ardent Plea is the other one. I'm a little surprised that the deck wasn't running it. So their goal is to do a bunch of different strategies to put big giant creatures in the graveyard, either the land cyclers from Lord of the Rings, like Generous End, or cycle cards like Striped Riverwinder, Waker of Waves, Street Wraith, Subtlety, and then the pinch elementals, Subtlety and Endurance, and some of the new ones you'll see as well. This deck doesn't look like it's playing them. You'll see some of the new evoke elemental cycles from Lorwyn as well. The one that Thought Seizes You or whatever. So this has a bunch of free pitch interaction, lots of Force of Negations typically to go along with their game plan here. And they can put a ton of power and toughness into play on turn 3 if they are going very fast. So we are still able to race them, but this matchup, it's very important to kind of know what free pitch spells they can have, and then timing your burn to make sure that all of your spells resolve. Because if all your burn spells resolve, you can totally race them, but the interaction is what gets you. And then obviously be careful about Generous Ent, which makes food tokens. That can get really tricky because if they have enough mana, they can just start cracking food tokens, and then you're going to get stalled out of the game. Roiling Vortex is good in this matchup because they have free pitch interaction, and then also them casting the free Living End off of the enablers is a free spell that pings, and Roiling Vortex will deal 5 to them. This is a graveyard deck, obviously, so bring in your graveyard hate. Okay, I think that's a pretty good overview of some of the biggest decks in Modern right now. If you guys have any questions, let me know in the comments, and, good luck out there. I don't think every deck I went over today is beatable. I have beaten every single deck that I talked about today. A lot of the matchups that used to be better for us have gotten a lot worse, like Tron, like Zoo, and it's a little annoying in that regard, like Affinity a little bit too, and that's annoying, obviously. It's annoying that we used to have a better suite of matchups, but we have the tools to beat all of these decks if you have really tight play, if you're paying attention, if you're plugged into what your opponent's deck is doing and how the deck works, and just kind of knowing when to, hold up certain spells or when to push. I still don't love the odds because, again, there's a lot of unfair stuff in Modern right now. There's a lot of stuff that feels like it has to be answered, but you can navigate. And obviously, if you're on the Incinerator plan, we have our own unfair thing going on as well. So that is a little bit of an informative video. Let me know how y'all do if you take Burn to RCQs. I'm taking it to Saturday, or to an RCQ this Saturday, actually. We'll see how that goes. But in the meantime, thanks for watching, and have a great rest of your day.